David Sterling's keychain clattered to the marble floor as he watched his wheelchair-bound son, paralyzed for 3 years, take shaky but unmistakable steps into his housekeeper's outstretched arms, both of them crying and whispering prayers he thought he'd forgotten how to believe. "Hey, my amazing family. I've missed you all so much, and I've been thinking about all the memories and moments we've shared together. It's been a bit of a bumpy ride lately as we work through some technical hiccups, but trust me, we're on it, and everything will be up and running smoothly again soon. Your support means the world to me, especially right now. So please stick with me. If you're ready for today's story and excited to dive in, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from you. And don't forget, I've got another incredible story coming your way tomorrow, and you definitely won't want to miss it. Now, let's get started. David Sterling's fingers drummed against his Bentley's leather steering wheel as he waited for the light to change, his mind still replaying the morning's failed merger. The pharmaceutical deal would have added $50 million to his portfolio, but today it felt meaningless compared to the conversation he'd avoided having with Jake for 3 months. The latest specialist in Switzerland wants to try experimental stem cells, he thought, then immediately pushed it away. How many more times can I put him through that? 3 years since the skiing accident that stole his son's legs. 3 years of the world's best doctors delivering the same verdict: complete spinal cord injury, permanent paralysis, learn to adapt. 3 years of watching Jake's light dim a little more each day. David pressed the garage remote harder than necessary. The gleaming Malibu mansion rose before him, 12,000 square feet of architectural perfection that felt more like a beautiful tomb. He'd bought it when Jake was 13 and obsessed with skateboarding, dreaming of a son who'd use the massive backyard and custom halfpipe he'd installed. Now the halfpipe sat covered and forgotten, like so many dreams. Maybe I should have stayed at the office. The thought followed him as he stepped into the climate-controlled garage. At least at Sterling Pharmaceuticals, he could fix problems, make decisions that mattered. At home, he was just a father who'd failed to protect his son and now couldn't figure out how to help him want to live again. In the mansion's east wing, Maria Gonzalez knelt beside Jake's wheelchair in the spacious room that had once been a game room, now converted into a physical therapy space David had spent a fortune creating and Jake refused to use. "Mijo, your papa, he loves you so much," she whispered in Spanish, her hands gently massaging Jake's unresponsive legs. "But he's scared. Just like you." Jake Sterling, 16 and rail-thin from 3 years of limited mobility, stared at his legs with a hollow expression that broke Maria's heart daily. The boy who'd once filled this house with laughter and skateboard wheels on marble had retreated so far inside himself that some days he barely spoke. But Maria saw something the doctors and therapists had missed. Yesterday, when she'd been helping him transfer from wheelchair to bed, she'd felt it, the slightest twitch in his left calf muscle. Involuntary, the experts would say. Meaningless. Maria knew better. She'd spent 2 years caring for her own son Miguel after his cerebral palsy diagnosis, learning to read the language of his body, celebrating microscopic victories that led to miracles doctors said were impossible. Miguel had taken his first steps at age 5, stunning every specialist who'd written him off. Before the fever took him at 7. Maria's hand found the silver cross at her throat, Miguel's cross, the one she placed around his neck the day he walked across their tiny kitchen into her arms. "Listen to me, mi amor," she said softly to Jake. "Your body remembers how to walk. The doctors, they see broken things. But God, He sees what can be healed." Jake's eyes met hers, really met them, not the polite glance he usually offered. "The MRI shows complete severance, Maria. My spinal cord is—" "Your spinal cord is not your spirit," she interrupted gently. "And your spirit is not broken. Just tired." She stood, moving to the abandoned parallel bars David had installed. "Today we try something different. Not for the doctors, not for your papa. For you." Jake shook his head. "I can't feel anything below my waist. I've tried physical therapy. I've tried." "You tried their way," Maria said, pulling his wheelchair closer to the bars. "Today we try faith." Something flickered in Jake's expression, not hope exactly, but curiosity. Maria had been the only person in 3 years who didn't look at him with pity, who didn't speak to him like he was fragile. "What if I fall?" he whispered. "Then I catch you," she said simply. "Like mothers do." Outside, David Sterling's Bentley turned into the driveway 4 hours early, carrying a father who had no idea he was about to witness the impossible. Have you ever witnessed something that challenged everything you believed was possible? What role does faith play in healing, both physical and emotional? Share your thoughts below. David's Italian leather shoes whispered against the marble foyer as he set down his briefcase, the familiar silence of the house wrapping around him like a shroud. He loosened his tie, expecting the usual routine, Jake locked away upstairs, Maria quietly preparing dinner in the kitchen. Instead, he heard something that made him freeze mid-step. Crying. Not the bitter, angry sobs he'd grown accustomed to hearing through Jake's bedroom door, but something different. Raw. Vulnerable. Mixed with soft Spanish words he couldn't understand. David moved toward the sound, his heart rate climbing with each step. The voices were coming from the East Wing, the therapy room Jake had refused to enter for months. "Sí, mi niño. Just one step. Just breathe and trust." Maria's voice, thick with emotion and something else, hope? David reached the doorway and the sight before him shattered every assumption he'd built about what was possible. Jake was standing. Not supported by the wheelchair he'd been bound to for 3 years, not propped up by the mechanical lift David had bought and Jake had rejected. His son was standing on his own 2 feet, gripping the parallel bars with white knuckles, his legs trembling but holding his weight. "I can feel." Jake's voice cracked, tears streaming down his face. "Maria, I can feel my legs." David's breath caught in his throat. 3 years of specialists. Millions spent on experimental treatments. Every expert certain that Jake would never walk again. And here was his son, taking a shaking half-step forward. "Muy bien, mijo." Maria cheered softly, positioned just behind Jake with her arms ready to catch him. "One more. For your mama in heaven." Jake sobbed, a sound of pure anguish and joy mixed together. He lifted his right foot, and David watched in stunned silence as his son took another impossible step. "She would be so proud," Jake whispered, and David realized he was talking about Rebecca. "She always said I was stronger than I knew." Maria's face was radiant with tears. "She is watching, mi amor. She sees everything." David's hand gripped the doorframe so hard his knuckles went white. His mind reeled between disbelief and something dangerous, hope. The kind of hope he'd murdered in his own heart after the 10th doctor delivered the same devastating verdict. This isn't possible. The MRI scans. The nerve conductivity tests. They all showed. Jake took another step, and David's medical skepticism crumbled. "How long?" David's voice came out as a croak. Both Jake and Maria spun toward the doorway, Jake nearly losing his balance before Maria steadied him. "Papa." Jake's eyes went wide with something between joy and terror. We weren't. How long has this been happening?" David stepped into the room, his surgeon's mind cataloging everything. Jake's stance, the muscle definition that had returned to his legs, the way he distributed his weight. Maria lifted her chin defiantly, though David could see her hands shaking. 2 weeks. Every day after school. Just small movements at first, then. 2 weeks. David's voice climbed. "He's been walking for 2 weeks, and you didn't call me?" Didn't call his doctors. Jake's face crumpled. "Papa, please don't be angry. I wanted to surprise you. I wanted to walk to you at Christmas and surprise me." David's control snapped. "You could have been injured. If you'd fallen, if you damaged what function you still have." "What function?" Jake's voice turned bitter. "Sitting in that chair for the rest of my life? Never being able to play sports, never dancing at my wedding, never." The doctors said. The doctors were wrong. Maria interrupted, stepping protectively in front of Jake. "Your son is walking. Your son is healing. And instead of celebrating a miracle, you're worried about medical protocols." David stared at her, this quiet woman who cleaned his house and made his meals, who was now looking at him like he was the greatest threat in the room. "You don't understand the complexity of spinal injuries. If Jake has partial function returning, it needs to be monitored, documented. It needs to be celebrated," Maria said firmly. "It needs to be nurtured with love, not analyzed with fear." Jake's legs began to shake from the effort of standing. "I need to sit down," he whispered. Maria immediately moved to help him, but David rushed forward. "Let me." "No." Jake's voice was quiet but firm. Maria helps me. She's the one who believed when everyone else gave up. The words hit David like a physical blow. His own son was choosing the housekeeper over him. His son trusted a woman David barely knew with his life, his healing, his hope. As Maria gently helped Jake back into his wheelchair, David watched the careful way she supported him, the tenderness in her touch, the absolute confidence in her movements. This wasn't the first time. This was routine born of repetition, trust built through countless private moments of faith and effort. "Jake," David said quietly, "why didn't you tell me?" Jake wouldn't meet his eyes. "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. Like it's a problem to solve instead of a miracle to believe in. When was the last time you chose to believe in something impossible? How do we balance medical reality with the power of hope? Tell me your thoughts in the comments." The room fell silent except for Jake's labored breathing and the sound of David's world reshaping itself around this new impossible reality. His son could walk. And David had just turned a miracle into a crisis. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the tick of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Rebecca's parents that now seemed to mock the fractured time they'd lost. David ran his hands through his graying hair, his mind racing between wonder and terror. "Jake, you have to understand. Spinal cord injuries don't just heal. There are protocols, safeguards. What if you've caused permanent damage by pushing too hard?" "Permanent damage?" Jake's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Papa, I've been permanently damaged for 3 years. What's left to lose?" Maria positioned herself beside Jake's wheelchair like a guardian, her small frame radiating fierce protectiveness. "Mr. Sterling, with respect, your son has gained more in 2 weeks than in 3 years of your doctors and their machines." "You're not a medical professional," David snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. "I'm sorry, Maria, but you don't understand the complexity." "I understand hope," she interrupted, her accent thickening with emotion. "I understand faith. I understand what it means to watch a child fight for his life while everyone around him gives up." David's chest tightened. There was something in her voice, a pain that matched his own. "This isn't about giving up. This is about being realistic." Realistic. Jake wheeled his chair closer, his eyes blazing with an anger David hadn't seen since the accident. "Your realistic doctors told me I'd never feel my legs again. Your realistic specialists said I should focus on accepting my limitations. Maria's faith got me standing." "And what happens when you fall?" David's voice cracked despite his effort to stay controlled. "What happens when you realize this is temporary, when the hope turns to disappointment? I can't watch you go through that again." The words hung in the air, revealing the truth David had tried to bury. This wasn't about medical protocols. This was about his own terror of hope, the same hope that had sustained him through Rebecca's cancer treatments until the very end, the hope that had shattered him when she died anyway. Jake stared at his father with dawning understanding. "You're not protecting me from disappointment, Papa. You're protecting yourself." Maria stepped forward, her voice gentle but unwavering. "Mr. Sterling, I lost my son Miguel when he was 7. He had cerebral palsy. The doctors said he would never walk, never talk clearly, never live a normal life." David's defensive posture softened slightly. "Maria, I didn't know. He walked across our kitchen into my arms when he was 5, she continued, tears glistening in her eyes. "The doctors called it impossible. I called it Tuesday. For 2 beautiful years, he ran and played and laughed. Then the fever came and took him to heaven." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Do you think I regret those 2 years of walking because they ended? Do you think I wish I had listened to the doctors and never tried?" Jake reached out and took Maria's hand. "She taught me that miracles don't come with guarantees, Papa. They come with faith." David felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. But what if the specialists are right? What if this is just temporary muscle spasms, or phantom sensations, or... "Then we'll deal with it," Jake said simply. "Together. But right now, today, I can feel my legs. I can stand. I took steps, Papa. Real steps. And instead of celebrating with me, you're already planning for me to fail." The accusation hit like a physical blow. David sank into the leather chair beside the parallel bars, suddenly feeling every one of his 52 years. "I'm trying to protect you." From what? From hope. From healing? From living? Jake's voice rose. I've spent 3 years in that chair watching you work yourself to death because you can't face what happened to me. Now something impossible is happening, something beautiful, and you want to turn it into another tragedy. That's not, David started, but the words died in his throat because Jake was right. He had thrown himself into work to avoid facing his son's condition, to avoid confronting his own helplessness. And now, faced with the possibility of healing, his first instinct was still to protect himself from the pain of potential loss. Maria knelt beside David's chair, her voice soft but firm. Mr. Sterling, I know you love your son. But love without faith is just fear wearing a disguise. David looked up at her, this woman he'd barely noticed in 2 years of employment, who had somehow accomplished what millions of dollars and the world's best doctors couldn't. How do you have so much faith after losing your child? Because Miguel taught me that miracles don't always last forever, but they always matter. Every step he took mattered. Every laugh mattered. Every moment of joy mattered, even though I knew it might end. Jake rolled his wheelchair directly in front of his father. I need you to believe in this, Papa. I need you to believe in me. Because I can't do this alone, and Maria won't be here forever. The words sent a chill through David. What do you mean, Maria won't be here forever? Maria and Jake exchanged a glance, and David realized there was more to this story. Something they hadn't told him. Maria's visa expires in 6 weeks, Jake said quietly. She's been trying to get an extension, but immigration denied her application. She's supposed to go back to Guatemala. David's world tilted again. The woman who had given his son back his legs was going to be deported in 6 weeks? Why didn't you tell me? David asked. Because you barely notice I exist until something goes wrong, Maria said simply, without malice. I'm just the housekeeper who cooks and cleans and disappears when you come home. How often do we overlook the people who are quietly changing our lives? What would you do if you discovered a miracle was happening right under your roof? Let me know your thoughts below. David stared at the 2 most important people in his house, his son who was learning to walk again, and the woman who was teaching him, who would be gone in 6 weeks unless David did something about it. For the first time in 3 years, David Sterling was going to have to choose between his fear and his family. David stood abruptly, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Pacific. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Rebecca's favorite colors. She used to say sunsets were God's way of reminding people that endings could be beautiful too. 6 weeks, he repeated, his breath fogging the glass. Maria, why didn't you come to me about the visa issue? Behind him, he heard Jake's wheelchair roll closer. Because you would have handled it like a business transaction, Papa. File the paperwork, make some calls, problem solved. You wouldn't have understood what Maria means to our family. Our family. The words stung because they were true. Somewhere in the past 2 years, while David had been drowning in work and grief, Maria had become more than an employee. She'd become the heart of a house that had forgotten how to beat. I could help with immigration lawyers, David said, turning back to them. Money isn't. It's not about money. Maria's voice was quiet but firm. They denied my application because I don't have family ties here. I'm not married to an American citizen. I don't have children who are citizens. I'm just domestic help. The clinical term hung in the air like an accusation. David had written her paychecks for 2 years but had never learned her story, never asked about her dreams, never seen her as anything more than efficient service. Jake's hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests. She has family here. She has me. She has us. Jake. Maria's voice carried a warning, but Jake pressed on. Tell him, Maria. Tell him what you told me about Miguel. About why you really took this job. Maria's face went pale. Mijo, that's private. Nothing's private anymore, Jake said fiercely. Papa needs to understand who you really are. David moved closer, settling back into his chair. Something in Jake's tone suggested this was bigger than immigration status. Maria, I'd like to hear whatever you're willing to share. Maria's hands twisted in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. When Miguel died, I wanted to die too. I had nothing left. No reason to wake up, no reason to keep breathing. I came to America because staying in Guatemala meant seeing his empty bed every morning. David's throat tightened. He recognized that particular shade of grief. I took jobs with other families first, she continued. Rich families with healthy children. But watching those children run and play, it was like having my heart ripped out every day. I thought I was broken, that I'd never be able to care about anyone again. Jake reached for her hand. Then you found us. Then I found you, she agreed, squeezing his fingers. A boy who was hurting like I was hurting. A father who was drowning like I was drowning. And I realized, maybe God didn't take Miguel away from me. Maybe he sent me to find another son who needed what only a grieving mother could give. The room fell silent. David felt something shift in his chest, a recognition so profound it took his breath away. You see Jake as your son. I see Jake as the reason I remember how to hope, Maria said simply. Every day he fights to get better, I remember why life is worth fighting for. Jake's eyes filled with tears. She saved my life, Papa. Not just my legs. My life. When you were working 18-hour days, when the therapists gave up, when I wanted to give up, Maria was here. She made me remember that I'm more than what happened to me. David's carefully maintained composure cracked. Jake, I know I haven't been. I threw myself into work because I didn't know how to help you. Every time I looked at you, I saw my failure. I should have been watching you on that mountain. I should have. Stop. Jake's voice cut through David's spiral of guilt. The accident wasn't your fault. But the last 3 years? The way you disappeared into your office? That was a choice. The truth hit like a sledgehammer. David had abandoned his son when Jake needed him most, leaving Maria to fill the void with the kind of unconditional love David had forgotten how to give. I want to make this right, David said hoarsely. The visa, the immigration status. I'll hire the best lawyers. Green card, permanent residency, whatever it takes. It's not that simple, Maria said. I already consulted with 3 attorneys. Without marriage or blood family connections, without specialized skills they can't get from American workers. They all said the same thing. Deportation is almost certain. Jake slammed his fist against his wheelchair's armrest. There has to be something. You can't just leave when I'm finally getting better. David watched his son's anguish and felt a surge of determination he hadn't experienced since Rebecca's diagnosis. What about adoption? Or guardianship? If you were legally Jake's guardian. I'm 16, Papa. I can't have a guardian who isn't family. Then what about? David's mind raced through legal possibilities. Maria, would you consider marriage? A marriage of convenience to establish citizenship. Both Jake and Maria stared at him in shock. I mean it, David pressed on, his business mind engaging fully for the first time in this emotional minefield. Not a real marriage, obviously. A legal arrangement. You'd have your green card, Jake would have you in his life, and I'd have the peace of knowing you're both taken care of. Maria's face flushed. Mr. Sterling, I couldn't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. It makes perfect sense. Does it? Jake asked quietly. Papa, do you hear yourself right now? David paused, realizing how his proposal sounded. Clinical. Transactional. Everything Jake had accused him of being. I'm trying to solve the problem, David said defensively. You're trying to buy your way out of having to feel anything, Jake replied. Maria isn't a business acquisition. She's family. The word hung between them, loaded with implications David wasn't ready to examine. Outside, the sun had fully set, leaving the room bathed in shadows. None of them moved to turn on the lights. Sometimes darkness made truth easier to speak. I don't know how to do this, David admitted finally. I don't know how to be a father to a son who's healing when I'm still broken. I don't know how to let someone else love him better than I do. What does it mean to truly put family first? How do we overcome our own brokenness to support the people we love? Share your thoughts in the comments. Maria's voice came soft through the darkness. Mr. Sterling, love isn't a competition. Jake has room in his heart for both of us. The question is, do you have room in yours for a miracle you can't control? David closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years of grief and guilt and missed opportunities. When he opened them, Jake was watching him with hope and terror in equal measure. 6 weeks to figure out how to save the woman who had saved his son. 6 weeks to learn how to be the father Jake deserved. 6 weeks to decide if he was brave enough to believe in miracles. The darkness in the therapy room had become a confessional, where truths too painful for daylight could finally breathe. David reached for the lamp switch, but Maria's voice stopped him. Please. Leave it dark. Some stories are easier told in shadows. David's hand fell away. Outside, the Pacific waves crashed against the cliffs below, a rhythm Rebecca used to say sounded like the earth's heartbeat. Tonight, it felt like time slipping away. There's more you need to know, Maria said, her voice barely audible. About Miguel. About why his walking mattered so much. Jake turned his wheelchair to face her fully. In the weeks they'd spent together, she'd shared pieces of her story, but never the whole truth. Miguel wasn't just born with cerebral palsy, she began, her accent thickening with emotion. He was born because I was young and stupid and fell in love with a man who disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant. David felt his chest tighten. He recognized the weight of single parenthood, though his had come through loss rather than abandonment. I was 18, living with my mother in Guatemala City. No education, no money, no future. When Miguel came and the doctors saw his condition. She paused, gathering strength. They told me to put him in an institution. They said he would be a burden, that I was too young to sacrifice my life for a damaged child. But you didn't, Jake said softly. I couldn't. The moment I held him, I knew he was meant to be mine. Not despite his challenges, but because of them. I was the mother God chose for this special boy. David thought of his own moment of recognition, holding Jake for the first time, feeling that fierce protective love that redefined everything he thought he knew about himself. I worked 3 jobs, Maria continued. Cleaning houses in the morning, serving food at lunch, washing dishes at night. Every peso went to Miguel's therapy, his medicine, his special equipment. My mother said I was killing myself for a child who would never appreciate it. She was wrong, David said quietly. She was scared, Maria corrected. Just like you were scared when you saw Jake walking today. When you love someone fragile, hope becomes the most dangerous emotion in the world. Jake wheeled closer to Maria's chair. Tell him about the day Miguel walked. Maria's smile was visible even in the darkness, the kind of joy that transcends grief. He was 5 years old. The therapists had been working with him for 3 years, but his muscles were still so weak. I would hold him up between the parallel bars for 10 minutes every night after work, talking to him, singing to him, begging God for a miracle. David found himself leaning forward, caught in her story despite himself. One Tuesday evening, I was exhausted. I had worked 14 hours, my feet were bleeding in my shoes, and Miguel seemed more frustrated than usual. I was ready to give up for the night when he looked at me and said, "Mommy, I'm going to walk to you." Maria's voice broke slightly. I thought he meant in his imagination, you know? Children say these things. But he gripped those bars and pulled himself up straighter than he'd ever stood. And then, 1 step. 2 steps. 3. He walked into your arms, Jake said, as if he'd heard the story many times. He walked into my arms, she confirmed. 7 steps across that tiny therapy room. I screamed so loud the neighbors thought someone was being murdered. Miguel just laughed and said, "See, Mommy? I told you I could do it." David's throat constricted. That must have been the happiest day of your life. It was, Maria said simply. For 2 years, he walked. Not perfectly, not easily, but he walked. He went to school, he played with other children, he lived the life the doctors said was impossible. Every morning when he got out of bed and took those first steps, I thanked God for another day of miracles. The room fell silent except for the waves below. David knew this story had a tragic ending. The fever came suddenly, Maria whispered. Meningitis. In Guatemala, by the time we got to a hospital with proper equipment. She wiped her eyes. He died holding my hand, telling me not to cry because he would walk in heaven with Jesus. Jake reached out and took her hand. Miguel sent you to me. That's what I believe, she said, squeezing his fingers. When I saw you in that wheelchair, so angry, so lost, I saw Miguel. But I also saw possibility. The same fire in your eyes that Miguel had when he decided to walk. David stood and moved to the window, struggling with emotions too complex to name. Why didn't you tell me any of this when I hired you? Would it have mattered? You needed someone to clean your house and cook your meals. My story wouldn't have changed the job description. The words stung because they were accurate. 2 years ago, David had been looking for invisible help, not human connection. He'd wanted someone who would maintain his house without disrupting his careful avoidance of emotional intimacy. It would have mattered, he said finally. It should have mattered. Mr. Sterling, Maria's voice was gentle but firm. I didn't tell you my story for sympathy. I told you so you would understand why I can't give up on Jake. Miguel taught me that miracles are worth fighting for, even when, especially when, everyone else says they're impossible. Jake's voice cut through the darkness with surprising strength. Papa, Maria has been fighting for me every day for 2 weeks. Not because it's her job, not because you pay her, but because she sees something in me that even I forgot was there. David turned back to face them. In the dim light from the hallway, he could see Jake sitting straighter in his wheelchair, his whole posture different from the defeated boy who used to hide in his room. What do you see? David asked quietly. I see a son who's ready to walk back into his father's life, Jake said. If his father is ready to stop running away. The challenge hung in the air between them. David thought about the parallel bars, about Jake's trembling legs, about Maria's unwavering faith in the face of impossible odds. I've been so afraid of losing you again, David admitted. After the accident, after your mother. I couldn't bear the thought of hoping for your recovery and watching you suffer through more disappointment. So instead you chose to suffer through certainty, Jake said. Papa, hope isn't a guarantee. It's a choice. Maria taught me that. David looked at Maria, really looked at her for the first time in 2 years. Not the efficient housekeeper who kept his life running smoothly, but the woman who had lost everything and still chose to believe in miracles. The mother who had loved a broken child back to wholeness, twice. Have you ever had someone see potential in you that you couldn't see in yourself? What would you risk to give someone else a second chance? Let me know in the comments. I want to learn, David said finally. I want to learn how to hope again. I want to learn how to be the father Jake needs. And I want to find a way to keep you here, Maria, not as an employee, but as family. Jake's face lit up with the first genuine smile David had seen in 3 years. Does this mean you'll help with my walking practice? David's breath caught. You want me to help? I want us to do this together, Jake said. All 3 of us. Like a real family. For the first time since Rebecca's death, David Sterling felt something dangerous blooming in his chest, hope. 3 days later, David found himself kneeling on the therapy room floor at 6 a.m., his $1,000 suit replaced with old jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt he'd forgotten he owned. Jake's physical therapy session had become a family ritual, something that would have seemed impossible a week ago. Remember me, Joe, your body knows how to do this, Maria coached softly as Jake gripped the parallel bars. Don't think so hard. Just feel. David watched his son's face scrunch with concentration, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Jake had managed 12 steps yesterday, a record that had left all 3 of them crying and laughing in equal measure. Papa, can you count them out loud? Jake asked, his voice strained with effort. Like you used to count my skateboard tricks? The memory hit David unexpectedly. Saturday mornings in the driveway, 13-year-old Jake attempting kickflips while David cheered from the porch steps. When did I stop being his biggest fan? Ready when you are, champion, David said, surprised by how natural the old nickname felt on his tongue. Jake lifted his right foot, trembling but determined. 1. Beautiful form, David called out, his voice thick with pride. Look at those strong legs. Jake took another shaky step. 2. Maria positioned herself at the end of the bars, her arms outstretched like she was waiting to catch a toddler taking his first steps. Come to me, mi niño. Your Mama Maria is waiting. Something about the phrase, Mama Maria, should have felt strange to David. Instead, it felt right. Natural. Like pieces of their broken family were finally clicking into place. 3, 4. Jake's voice grew stronger with each step. Papa, I can feel my muscles remembering. David's throat tightened. That's my boy. That's my incredible, strong, amazing boy. By step 8, Jake was grinning through his tears. By step 10, David was on his feet, cheering like he was at the Olympics. By step 12, Maria was sobbing in Spanish, thanking God and Miguel and every saint she could remember. When Jake reached 13 steps and collapsed into Maria's waiting arms, David rushed to join the embrace. For a moment, they were just a family celebrating a miracle. No complicated history, no immigration paperwork, no fear of tomorrow. "I'm so proud of you," David whispered against Jake's sweat-dampened hair. "I'm so damn proud of you." "Language, Papa," Jake laughed, but he was clinging to both of them like his life depended on it. "Your mama would be dancing right now," David said, his voice breaking. "She always knew you were stronger than the world gave you credit for." Jake pulled back to look at his father. "Do you really think she can see this?" David glanced at Maria, who was watching them with the soft expression of a mother whose prayers had been answered. "I think she sent us exactly the person we needed to help us find our way back to each other." Maria's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Miguel would have loved you so much, Jake. You have his determination, his spirit." "Tell me about him," Jake said, settling back into his wheelchair, but keeping one hand in Maria's and one in David's. "Tell me more about Miguel." For the next hour, they sat in the therapy room as morning light flooded through the windows, and Maria painted pictures with words of a little boy who refused to let limitations define his joy. She told them about Miguel's laugh, infectious and unrestrained. About his favorite game of pretending to be a superhero who could fly. About the way he would stroke her cheek when she was sad and whisper, "No lors, Mommy. Tomorrow will be better." "He sounds like he was amazing," Jake said softly. "He was. Just like you are amazing. Just like your papa is amazing, even when he forgets how to show it." David felt heat creep up his neck. "I haven't been amazing. I've been absent." "You're here now," Maria said simply. "That's what matters." Jake shifted in his wheelchair to face his father directly. "Papa, I need to tell you something. When I first started walking with Maria, I was angry at you. I thought if you really loved me, you would have been the one helping me, believing in me." David's heart clenched. "Jake." "Let me finish," Jake said gently. "But Maria helped me understand that people grieve differently. She said you weren't avoiding me because you didn't love me. You were avoiding me because you loved me too much to watch me suffer anymore." David's vision blurred. "That's exactly right. Every time I looked at you, I saw my failure. I couldn't protect you from the accident, couldn't fix your injuries, couldn't even figure out how to talk to you about what we'd both lost. But that's the thing, Papa. We didn't just lose Mama. We lost each other. And I don't want to lose any more time." Maria stood quietly and moved toward the door. "I should start breakfast." "Stay," both David and Jake said simultaneously, then looked at each other and laughed. "Please stay," David added. "You're part of this conversation. You're part of this family." The word hung in the air, loaded with meaning none of them had dared speak aloud before. "Mr. Sterling," Maria began. "David," he corrected gently. "Family members use first names." Maria's smile could have powered the whole house. "David, I need you both to know that these past few weeks have been the happiest I've had since Miguel died. Watching Jake discover his strength, seeing you two find each other again, it's been a gift. Then we have to find a way to keep you here," David said firmly. "Not just for Jake's recovery, but because—" He struggled to find the right words. "Because you've reminded us how to be a family." Jake wheeled closer to both of them. "What if we really did it? What if we became a real family? Not just the marriage of convenience thing Papa mentioned, but something real." David felt his heart rate climb. "Jake, that's a big decision. Marriage, even for immigration purposes, is serious business." "I'm not talking about business, Papa. I'm talking about love." The simple statement hit David like lightning. Because it was true. Somewhere in the past week, watching Maria's unwavering dedication to Jake, witnessing her gentle way of calling David back to himself, feeling their broken house become a home again, he had fallen in love. Not the desperate, passionate love he'd shared with Rebecca, but something deeper. Quieter. Built on respect and shared purpose, and the kind of partnership that could weather any storm. When was the last time you felt like you truly belonged somewhere? How do we recognize when someone has become family, not just through blood but through choice? Share your thoughts below. "I love you both," Jake said simply, as if admitting something everyone already knew. "Maria, you brought me back to life. Papa, you're learning how to live again. We're good for each other. We're better together." Maria looked between father and son, her expression a mixture of hope and terror. "Are you sure this is what you want? Not just what's convenient or practical, but what your hearts truly want." David reached for her hand, surprised by how right it felt in his. "I want whatever gives us the best chance of staying together. All three of us." The therapy room fell silent except for the sound of waves below and hearts beating too fast. They were standing at the edge of something that would change everything, and for the first time in years, David wasn't afraid of the leap. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks later, shattering the fragile peace they'd built like glass hitting concrete. David was in the therapy room, spotting Jake through his morning walking routine, now up to 27 steps, when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Mr. Sterling? This is Agent Patricia Hendricks from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We need to speak with you immediately regarding your employee, Maria Elena Gonzalez." David's blood turned to ice. "What about Maria?" Jake paused mid-step, still gripping the parallel bars, his face draining of color. "Sir, we've received information that Ms. Gonzalez has been working without proper documentation. We need her to report to our office today for processing. Her deportation hearing has been moved up to this Friday." Friday. David's voice cracked. "That's 3 days from now. The immigration lawyer said we had until next month. Circumstances have changed. We'll expect her at our downtown office by 2 p.m. today, or we'll issue a warrant for her arrest." The line went dead. David stared at his phone, his mind reeling. "Papa?" Jake's voice was small, terrified. "What's happening?" Before David could answer, Maria appeared in the doorway with a breakfast tray, her face lighting up at the sight of Jake standing strong. "Look at my champion. 25 steps today, yes." 27, Jake whispered, then his legs buckled. David caught him just as Maria dropped the tray, fruit and coffee scattering across the marble floor. "Jake, what's wrong?" She rushed to help him back into his wheelchair, her hands checking for injury. "They called," David said numbly. "ICE. They want you downtown in 2 hours. Your hearing is Friday." Maria went perfectly still, her face turning ashen. "But the lawyer said." "Someone reported you," David realized with dawning horror. "Someone called immigration and reported that you're undocumented." Jake's hands clenched into fists. Who would do that? Who even knows? David's mind raced through possibilities, then landed on a sickening probability. The physical therapist. Dr. Morrison. When I called to cancel Jake's regular sessions because he was making progress at home. Maria sank into a chair, her whole body trembling. "You told him I was helping Jake walk. I thought he'd be impressed. I thought." David's voice died as he realized his mistake. Dr. Morrison, who'd been collecting thousands of dollars monthly for sessions Jake refused to attend, would have every reason to be vindictive about losing such a lucrative client. "You thought wrong," Jake said bitterly. "You bragged to the wrong person, and now they're going to take her away." The accusation hit David like a physical blow. "Jake, I didn't know." "You never know." Jake exploded, his voice echoing off the therapy room walls. "You didn't know I was walking, you didn't know Maria's visa was expiring, you didn't know Dr. Morrison would be pissed about losing money. You don't pay attention to anything that matters." "That's not fair," David protested, but even as he said it, he knew Jake was right. He'd been so caught up in celebrating their progress that he'd forgotten how precarious their situation really was. Maria stood unsteadily, her professional mask slipping back into place. "I should go pack. If I report voluntarily, maybe they'll give me time to arrange my affairs." "No." Jake wheeled his chair between Maria and the door. "You're not leaving. We'll fight this." "With what?" Maria's voice was hollow. "I'm illegal, Jake. I overstayed my visa. I worked without proper documentation. They have every right to deport me." David's business mind finally engaged, but it felt too little, too late. "We can file an emergency appeal. Get an injunction. I'll call every lawyer in the city." "With 3 days' notice." Maria shook her head. "David, you have money and power, but you don't have miracles. Not for this. Jake's face crumpled. But I'm finally walking. We're finally a family. They can't just tear us apart now. Maria knelt beside his wheelchair, her own tears flowing freely. Mi niño, this isn't your fault. This isn't anyone's fault. It's my fault, David said quietly. I got careless. I got comfortable. I forgot that our happiness depended on staying invisible. Don't you dare, Jake snarled, spinning his chair to face his father. Don't you dare make this about your guilt. Make it about solutions. There are no solutions. David snapped back, his composure finally cracking. Do you think I'm not trying? Do you think I haven't been making calls, consulting lawyers, pulling every string I have? The system doesn't care about our family. It doesn't care about your progress. It cares about rules and documentation and money, Jake finished coldly. Everything cares about money. So buy your way out of this like you buy your way out of everything else. I can't buy my way out of federal immigration law. Then what good are you? Jake's words cut deep, precise as surgical instruments. What good is all your money and power if you can't protect the people you claim to love? The therapy room fell silent except for Maria's quiet sobbing. David felt like he was drowning, watching his son's faith in him die in real time. Jake, David said hoarsely, I know you're scared. I'm not scared, Papa. I'm disappointed. Jake's voice was flat, lifeless. For 3 weeks, I thought you'd finally learned how to fight for what matters. But the second things got hard, you gave up. Just like you gave up on me after the accident. I never gave up on you. You did. And now you're giving up on Maria. On us. Jake turned his wheelchair away from both of them. I should have known better than to trust you with something this important. Maria stood slowly, wiping her eyes. Please don't fight. This is hard enough without you two destroying each other. Why not fight? Jake asked bitterly. In 3 days, you'll be gone anyway. At least Papa and I can be miserable together. David watched his son retreat back into the shell of anger and despair they'd worked so hard to break him out of. In the span of one phone call, he'd lost everything: Maria's presence, Jake's trust, the family they'd been building. I'll go to the IC office, Maria said quietly. Maybe if I cooperate fully, they'll allow me a few more days to help Jake transition back to regular physical therapy. I'm not going back to regular therapy, Jake said flatly. If you're not here to help me, I'm not walking anymore. Jake, no, Maria pleaded. You can't give up your progress because of this. Watch me. Jake's smile was sharp and bitter. I walked for you, Maria. I got my hopes up for you. I let Papa back into my life for you. Without you here, what's the point? How quickly can hope turn to despair when the people we depend on let us down? What would you do if you had 72 hours to save your family? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. David stared at his son, this boy who had been learning to walk again, to trust again, to love again, and watched him choose to break his own heart rather than risk having it broken by others. I'll find a way, David said desperately. I'll find a way to fix this. But even as he said the words, he could see neither Jake nor Maria believed him anymore. And for the first time in his life, David Sterling wasn't sure he believed in himself either. The family they'd built in the therapy room was crumbling, and he had 72 hours to put it back together or lose everything that mattered. David Sterling sat alone in his home office at 2:30 a.m., staring at his computer screen through bloodshot eyes. Empty coffee cups littered his desk alongside legal documents, immigration forms, and a growing stack of business cards from lawyers who'd all told him the same thing: 3 days isn't enough time for a miracle. Maria had reported to IC that afternoon. They'd processed her paperwork and confirmed her Friday deportation. She was currently sleeping in the guest room, possibly her last night in America, while Jake had locked himself in his bedroom and refused to speak to anyone. David's fingers hovered over his keyboard, cursor blinking on a half-written email to Senator Patricia Whitman, an old family friend who owed him favors. But even senators couldn't rewrite federal law in 72 hours. His phone buzzed. A text from his business partner: David, the Shanghai deal needs your signature by noon Thursday. This can't wait. The Shanghai deal. $47 million. The culmination of 2 years' work. David stared at the message, then set the phone aside without responding. When did I become the kind of man who cares more about deals than people? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Maria stood in the doorway wearing one of Rebecca's old robes, something she'd borrowed months ago and never returned. In the lamplight, she looked fragile and exhausted. "You should sleep," she said quietly. "You can't solve this by making yourself sick." "I can't solve this at all," David replied, his voice hoarse from hours of phone calls. "Every lawyer says the same thing. Every contact I have says the same thing. The system doesn't bend for love stories." Maria entered the office and settled into the chair across from his desk, Rebecca's chair, where she used to sit while David worked late, keeping him company and making sure he didn't lose himself in business. "David, I need you to listen to me." Maria's voice carried a strength that surprised him. "When I was 18 and pregnant with Miguel, everyone told me to give up. When he was born disabled, they said it again. When he died, they said I should be grateful the burden was over." David looked up from his computer. "Maria." "I'm not finished." Her dark eyes held his steadily. "Every person who told me to give up was trying to protect me from pain. But they didn't understand that some things are worth the pain. Some people are worth fighting for, even when you know you might lose." "I am fighting," David protested. "I've made 37 phone calls today. I've offered to donate $1 million to immigration reform causes. I've begged, bargained, and threatened every contact I have. That's not the fight I'm talking about." David frowned. "What do you mean?" Maria leaned forward, her voice gentle but unwavering. "Jake isn't angry because you can't fix the immigration system. He's angry because when things got hard, your first instinct was to find a business solution instead of a human one. What's the difference? You've been treating our family like a merger that went bad. Calling lawyers, making deals, throwing money at problems. But families aren't saved by contracts, David. They're saved by choices." David's chest tightened. "What choice?" "There is no choice here. The law is the law. There's always a choice." Maria's voice was barely above a whisper. "Jake can choose to keep walking or retreat back into his wheelchair. I can choose to leave quietly or fight deportation from Guatemala and try to come back legally. And you can choose what kind of man you want to be in the face of losing everything." David stared at her, feeling something shift in his chest. "What kind of man do you think I should be?" "The kind who doesn't give up on love just because the paperwork is complicated." Before David could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Jake appeared in the doorway, moving slowly on crutches, a sight that would have filled David with joy yesterday but now felt like another loss. "You're walking," David said softly. "Barely." Jake's voice was flat. "Maria, I heard voices. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mijo. Just talking with your papa about tomorrow." Jake's face hardened. "About how he's going to watch you get deported and then go back to his office like nothing happened?" "Jake, that's not fair," David started, but his son cut him off. "Isn't it? When Mama was dying, you spent her last 3 weeks in merger meetings because you couldn't face watching her fade away. Now Maria's leaving and you're hiding in here with your computer again." The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was partially true. David had thrown himself into work during Rebecca's final weeks, telling himself he was securing their future when really he was avoiding the present. "I was trying to provide for you," David said weakly. "We didn't need provision. We needed presence." Jake moved closer, his voice breaking. "Mama needed you there. I needed you there. And now Maria needs you to show up as something other than a checkbook." David felt tears stinging his eyes. "Then tell me how to show up. Tell me what you need me to do." Jake and Maria exchanged a look, and David realized they'd already had this conversation. "Come with her," Jake said simply. "What?" "Come with Maria to Guatemala. Fight the deportation from there. Show the immigration court that she has genuine family ties here, that her life is intertwined with ours in ways that matter more than paperwork." David's business mind immediately started calculating obstacles. "Jake, I can't just leave the country indefinitely. The company, the board of directors, the Shanghai deal." "There it is," Jake said bitterly. "The deal. Always the deal." "It's not about the deal." David exploded, then caught himself. Okay, it is about the deal. But it's also about reality. If I abandon my responsibilities, I could lose everything we've built. The house, your medical care, your future. What future? Jake asked quietly. A future where Maria's gone and you're back to working 18-hour days, and I'm back to being a crippled kid who gave up on walking? That's the future you're protecting. David looked at his son, really looked at him. Jake was standing on his own power, leaning on crutches but bearing his own weight. 3 weeks ago, that had seemed impossible. Now it seemed like the least important miracle in the room. If I go to Guatemala with Maria, there's no guarantee I can get back in time to save the business, David said slowly, working through the implications. And if you don't go, Maria said softly, there's no guarantee you'll have a family worth coming back to. The office fell silent except for the tick of Rebecca's antique clock, the one that had counted down her final hours, the one that was now counting down Maria's last night in America. David thought about his wife's final words. Don't let fear make you forget how to love, David. Promise me. He'd broken that promise for 3 years. He'd let fear of losing Jake make him forget how to be present for Jake. He'd let fear of failure make him forget what success actually looked like. What would you sacrifice to keep your family together? When has love required you to choose faith over security? Share your thoughts in the comments. David stood slowly, his decision crystallizing like ice forming on glass. How long would we need to stay? Jake's eyes widened. Papa. If I go with Maria, if I fight this from Guatemala, how long before we know if it's working? Maria's voice was barely a whisper. The appeals process could take months, maybe a year. And the business? We'll survive or it won't, Jake said, moving closer on his crutches. But we won't survive without Maria. And I won't survive without the father who's brave enough to choose family over money. David looked at his son, at the woman who'd saved them both, at the choice that would define the rest of their lives. Pack light, he said finally. We leave tonight. ACT 9, resolution, words, 1,100. 14 months later. David Sterling stood in the Guatemala City courthouse, his once pristine business suits replaced by worn khakis and a simple cotton shirt. His hands were calloused from months of helping Maria's elderly mother with her small vegetable garden, and his Spanish had improved from non-existent to functional through sheer necessity and love. Senor Sterling, the immigration attorney called softly. Es hora. It's time. David looked across the courtroom at Maria, who sat clutching a folder of documents, letters from Jake's doctors confirming her essential role in his continued recovery, testimonials from their neighbors in Guatemala about David's integration into the community, and most importantly, a marriage certificate dated 6 months ago. Not a marriage of convenience this time, but a marriage born from watching someone sacrifice everything for love and realizing he wanted to be the kind of man worthy of that sacrifice. Jake was in the front row, his wheelchair folded and stored against the wall while he sat in a regular chair, a sight that still took David's breath away. His son had not only continued walking in Guatemala but had thrived, volunteering at a local clinic for disabled children and discovering a passion for physical therapy that had given his life new purpose. Senora Sterling, the judge called, and David felt his heart skip at the words. Even after 6 months of marriage, hearing Maria called by his name still felt like a miracle. They approached the bench together, Maria's hand trembling slightly in his. This hearing would determine whether she could return to the United States as David's spouse, whether the family they'd built in exile could come home. I've reviewed your petition, the judge said in English, her voice neutral. Mr. Sterling, you've presented compelling evidence of genuine marriage and family ties. However, I'm concerned about the employment abandonment. You left significant business obligations to follow your wife to Guatemala. David squared his shoulders. Yes, Your Honor. My son needed his stepmother, and my wife needed my support. Sterling Pharmaceuticals was a business I built. But this, he gestured to Maria and Jake, this is a family worth more than any business. The judge made a note. And your business? What happened to Sterling Pharmaceuticals? David's throat tightened. The Shanghai deal had collapsed spectacularly in his absence. His board of directors had staged a coup, buying him out at a fraction of his company's worth. On paper, he'd lost nearly everything. The company was sold, he said simply. I retained a small stake and enough liquid assets to support my family. We'll start over. Papa didn't just lose his business, Jake said, rising unsteadily from his chair. He found his purpose. He's been working with disabled children here, helping them access physical therapy equipment. He's fluent in Spanish now, and he's learned more about being a father in the past year than in the previous 16. The judge looked at Jake with interest. And you, young man? How has this year affected your recovery? Jake smiled, the genuine radiant smile David remembered from before the accident. Maria saved my ability to walk, but my father saved my ability to believe that walking towards something matters more than running away from pain. David felt tears prick his eyes. His son had become a man in Guatemala, not despite their exile, but because of it. Away from the pressures of their California life, Jake had discovered strength David never knew he possessed. Mrs. Sterling, the judge addressed Maria directly. You've been separated from your community in the United States for over a year. Do you still consider America your home? Maria stood, her voice clear and strong. Your Honor, home isn't a place. Home is the people who choose to build a life together despite impossible circumstances. David chose to leave everything familiar to fight for our family. Jake chose to continue his recovery in a foreign country because he believed we were worth it. And I choose to keep fighting for the right to call America home because that's where our future is. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the judge's pen. David held his breath, acutely aware that their entire future hinged on the next few minutes. I'm going to approve this petition, the judge said finally, and David felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. Mrs. Sterling, you'll receive your permanent resident status within 30 days. You're free to return to the United States immediately. Jake's cheer echoed through the courtroom as he stood and walked, to embrace both his father and stepmother. David held them both, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd survived together. Papa, Jake whispered, we did it. We're going home. No, Mijo, Maria said softly, using the endearment that had become natural for her son by choice rather than birth. We are home. Wherever we are together, that's home. 6 weeks later, Malibu, California. David pushed open the front door of their house and smiled at the sound that greeted them, laughter. Real, uninhibited laughter echoing from the therapy room where Jake was teaching Miguel Gonzalez, Maria's 5-year-old nephew who'd come to visit from Guatemala, how to navigate the parallel bars. Tio Jake, I did it. 4 steps. Miguel's English was improving rapidly, aided by his determination to communicate with his hero. That's incredible, buddy, Jake called back. Tomorrow we'll try for 5. David found Maria in the kitchen, preparing lunch for their extended family, not just the 3 of them now, but Maria's mother who'd come to help with Miguel, and Jake's physical therapy mentor from Guatemala who was visiting to see their American setup. How was the meeting? Maria asked, not looking up from chopping vegetables. Sterling Medical Equipment officially launches next month, David said, wrapping his arms around his wife from behind. Jake's designs for adaptive therapy equipment are already generating orders from 3 hospitals. Maria leaned back against his chest. And you? Are you happy starting over? David considered the question. The new business was a fraction of the size of Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Their house was smaller, they'd sold the Malibu mansion and bought something more modest, using the proceeds to fund Jake's scholarship program for disabled children in Guatemala. David's suits hung unworn in the closet while he spent his days in jeans and polo shirts, working hands-on with equipment design and patient advocacy. By every metric he'd once used to measure success, he'd failed spectacularly. I've never been happier in my life, he said honestly. From the therapy room came the sound of Miguel's delighted shriek as Jake helped him take his 5th step of the day. Maria smiled and covered David's hands with hers. Rebecca would be proud, she said softly. She'd be amazed, David corrected. 3 years ago, I was a man who thought love meant providing security. Now I know love means choosing each other every day, even when, especially when, it's terrifying. Jake appeared in the doorway, Miguel on his back for a piggyback ride, both of them grinning. Papa, Miguel wants to know if we can set up parallel bars in Guatemala too, at his school. David looked at his son, walking independently now, planning to study physical therapy in college, radiant with purpose, and felt his heart swell with pride. We'll make it happen, David said. All of us together. What does it mean to find your real purpose in life? How has someone's love changed the way you see what truly matters? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, David Sterling watched his wife teach his son to make pupusas while his son taught her nephew to believe in impossible things. They were no longer the broken family who'd hidden from each other in a mansion too big for their grief. They were exactly who they were meant to be, together, imperfect, miraculous, and finally completely whole. Jake looked up from the kitchen counter, flour in his hair and joy on his face. "Papa, Maria, I love our family." "I love our family too, Mijo," Maria said, pulling both her boys into a flowery hug. And for the first time in 4 years, David Sterling knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.